part of what I want to talk about today, which is identity. And people often don't want to change. They're
Mm,
afraid to.
mm-hmm,
And they know that something like a practice, a healing practice, is going to create a change in them
mm,
and for them. And they're not sure how to do that because, as I've spoken about it before, most of the time people just want to go back to a previous state that we call normal. And the healing process is one of transformation to a new state. And I've worked with a lot of people who just did not want to change.
mm,
And so they get stuck in whatever healing crisis they are experiencing. And they don't really transform. And often they don't heal
mm,
because they would rather stay with something that's familiar than experience something that they've never experienced before, especially when you're not feeling well. You know,
mm,
it can be very frightening. Or if you're sensing that there's something wrong in your body and you don't want to find out. And
mhm,
this is what happens to a lot of people. You know, they notice symptoms and they refuse to go to the doctor because they just don't want to find out. They're afraid of bad news.
mm,
And this
mhm,
happened to a lot of people where they waited way too long to investigate. And by that time, whatever the issue is has become much bigger and beyond the ability to control it. So it's not an uncommon experience. And you can't blame yourself, you know, working with loved ones who are suffering with different maladies and illnesses and having the tools and the resources that I do and coming to them and saying, "Hey, try this. This can help you." And watching a person consider it for a second and go, "Nah, that's not going to help. Those things don't work. Nothing you
mm,
can do. There's nothing you can do," which is really hard. It's hard to accept that your
mm,
loved one is not willing to at least try or look into something that might be helpful. But it's more common than the opposite. And then there's also a generational aspect. You know,
mhm,
I don't know how old your father was, but people of a certain generation don't are not open to anything that is not um, Western scientific medicine.
mhm,
Anything
mhm,
energetic, anything spiritual, nah, that's bullshit. That doesn't work.
mhm,
But that's the way they were raised. And it's unfortunate. It's very different now. And even people of a certain age, like in their 70s and 80s, are more open now to alternatives because they've been exposed to more of that in the media and probably within their communities.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting that you address this because I mean, my dad died 5 years ago,
Hmm.
almost, and still, it's hard for me to accept or to deal with the pain that you know, you have, something that could have helped. You
Right.
know, you have tools or people or ways to manage this and
Mm.
actually to heal everything. That is I believe in this. Also,
Yeah.
Parkinson's disease is known for not healable. I don't believe in this. And it's still, I experienced last week. I was, yeah, meditating, I felt like, oh my God, I'm still suffering. It does me so much pain
Hmm.
that I couldn't help, and that he wasn't able to accept the help.
They're two different things, though, and you have to make that distinction. You were, you wanted to help and you offered the help, but if the help is not accepted,
Mm,
if it's rejected, you must accept. And your
mm,
suffering comes from not accepting yet that it was
mm,
his choice.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
My mother died of lung cancer 20 years ago. And I was doing healing work then.
Mm-hmm.
And once we got the diagnosis, I remember she was already, we had a hospital bed set up in the living room because she was very weak from radiation treatments. And I said, Mom, let me do some energy work with you. And I placed my hands on top of her head and I started to transmit just healing energy. And she said, Stop, stop. And I just took my hands away and she said, I don't need that. I accept where I am and that I am going to die and I'm okay.
Mm,
I was devastated. I was like, but Mom, I can help you.
mm,
This will help. And she was very clear. And she died about 10 days later
mm,
and did it the way she wanted to do it.
mm,
And I struggled with that. I mean, I was a mess for a few days. I did not understand. But toward the end, it became clear that she wanted to leave on her own terms without interference.
mm, mhm,
And once I got to the point of accepting that, I was able to let go of my feeling of not enough. I could have done more, you know. There was nothing more to do. If a person is not willing to receive that, then you have to step back and say, I honor your decision,
mhm,
your choice. Because in those last stages, there's a lot of growth that takes place. There's a tremendous opportunity for spiritual growth and learning
mhm,
because a person has decided I'm leaving soon
mm,
and they enter this state of sort of grace, which is acceptance of the choice. And now they start looking at everything differently. They start looking at their life, at their choices, at the present. And this is an opportunity for accelerated growth. I saw it with a client of mine who was a very well-known conductor, orchestra conductor. And I worked with him for 6 years. He had cancer, lymphoma, and toward the end, he got to that same point. And that point was acceptance. Okay, the medication's not working anymore. The treatments are not working. What now? I accept this is where it's going. And he entered that state of grace, and it was beautiful, beautiful, in which he was able to receive his family, his students. And I got to witness this as well with such acceptance and grace. And that was very powerful for everybody around him who were
mm,
mourning in his presence because they knew that he wasn't going to last very long. But it was such a beautiful uh, space that he created
mm,
of just taking in the experience. And then it came down to the most simple experiences of him just looking out the window and seeing a bird outside and just breathing and entering almost like a childlike state of wonder. Look how beautiful everything is. And this was also a time when there was a lot of political drama and which he was up until that point very much invested in. And then he just turned off all the news and he said, you know what? It'll work itself out. Again, a state of acceptance. So when a person who's going to die and transition is able to enter that state of acceptance and grace, they give themselves a huge gift versus someone who is going to fight it tooth and nail until the very end, which I have also seen, and it does not go well. That is not a very pleasant experience.
Mhm.
So there's that side of it, and then there's the other side, which is all of us who have to witness this. And if we can get to that state of grace as well, of acceptance, and just support,
Mhm.
not with any regret, not with any guilt or any shame, but to honor that person's choice, then we have an opportunity to also learn and grow because it's a very powerful experience to lose a loved one that way. I lost my mother that way, my brother, my father, many friends. Um, and then there's after. After that experience is over and we've had a chance to process it initially, we're often left with the memories and the attachments. And it's the attachment which can be multi-dimensional. So we have the attachment to the physical presence of the person who's no longer there, and we miss them. We also have the attachment to the choices that were made or how it played out, the story, the narrative that we create for ourselves. Um, and those are the ones that create the most suffering, in my opinion. I've worked with people after they've lost a loved one and help them come to a point of acceptance that their loved one isn't really gone. They are still alive in our heart. And I have conversations with my departed loved ones all the
Mhm.
time,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know, because I
Mhm.
bring up their presence, or sometimes they'll just pop into my mind.
Mhm.
And I know that they're transmitting, they're trying to communicate. And I'll just pause and smile and go, wonderful.
Mhm.
It's nice to feel you, to sense you again.
Yeah.
Um, because we don't, this is my spiritual perspective, and you may or may not agree with it, but we don't disappear. We transform out of the physical state into the energetic state. But as a spiritual body, a soul, we still exist. And I've had many experiences with loved ones who have departed and have come back to show me that they still exist.
Mhm.
I've also
Yeah.
had many experiences of recovering, of remembering past lives that I have lived. And and I have experienced my death in many past lives, which was a fascinating process to look at that and say, well, I that time I died, it was not nice. It, you know, but the other time I was surrounded by my family and it was a beautiful experience for everybody. So I've had those experiences that have helped me to accept that our loved ones are still present in our lives and that we can still communicate and have
Mhm.
those conversations, within our heart, within our mind, in our dream state. I often will dream of friends that are gone and family that are gone. And it's always a beautiful thing. It's like, I'm so happy to see you. And I wake up with that feeling. And I know in my heart that they're still there in another dimension, in another form. So there's that aspect. And then there's the stories and the memories. My father died in 2020, and it was not a great experience. He had Alzheimer's, and it got
Mhm.
quite severe to the point where he really did not know who he was even. And he ended up in the hospital and never came out. He went into a coma for about 4 days. And during those 4 days, I was in communication with him. I would every night sit in meditation, focus on him, and feel him. And I would talk to him and guide him and say, it's okay. You didn't want to be in this. You made it clear you didn't want to live this way. And so now is your opportunity to let go and know that your family loves you. And here's the process, what you're going to experience. And this went on every night. I could feel his presence so clearly. And then on the fourth or fifth night, I tuned in and I couldn't feel him,
Yeah.
couldn't sense him. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And of course, I got the call about 4 hours later that he had let go. And it was such a powerful, again, a confirmation that I was communicating with him. We were having this exchange right up until that point where he transitioned. And it took some months later, but then he started to come back. Um, I started to experience him in my dreams or just in my waking state, as I have with my mother and my younger brother and many of my good friends. It's important to let go of how it went, the choices that were made, whatever stories that you've created about your role in that process. And again, it comes down to acceptance.
Mhm.
When you can accept that you loved your father loved you, that you look back at your life at all of the wonderful, rich experiences and memories that you had together. That is what you need to focus on more than what you did or did not do, what happened or didn't happen, because it's often messy.
Mhm.
It doesn't go according to any plan. And I've worked with clients who have died and their families right up to that point, and it's never what you think it's going to be. There's always surprise and the unexpected circumstance or choices that were made by many people. And sometimes, I've been with clients and their families where one or more family members did not want to let go, did not want to let them go. And then in that instance, often that person is very close to letting go, but they don't because the other person is literally holding them so
Mhm.
tightly.
Mhm.
And I witnessed that several times, and I had to pull them aside and say, he's ready. You're not.
Mhm.
You're holding him here. Look at all of the pain that it's causing everybody. When you decide to let go and accept, then your loved one can let go, and everybody else can now start the process of receiving the experience. And
Mhm.
it's amazing that when that person decides, when they see that holding on like that is not helping, and it's often making a situation more painful. They will say, "You're right. Okay, yes," and they'll go and talk to their loved one who's often, deep inside themselves, who can hear it and feel it. And once that is communicated, they let go.
Mhm.
So it's the other aspect of that is losing someone that's very close to us creates an identity crisis for us who are left behind. And
Mhm.
it's often that we feel like we've lost a part of our soul, a part of our heart when someone close to us departs. And that changes us. That what it does is open our heart. And we can look at that in different ways. We can look at it as a wound, or we can look at it as more space to receive love and give love and experience. For those who look at that loss as a mortal wound, they will suffer for years and years and years because they are then creating this narrative that they are mortally wounded and will never recover from the loss. And we see that a lot, people, they just sort of pull into themselves. They don't live fully. What they do is they lock themselves into this dimensional space of their own creation in which they re-describe their loss over and over and over again. This happens when, we have an illness or an injury that also alters our ability to live freely or function normally as we used to. There's a choice. I can sort of bemoan what I can't do or what I don't have anymore, in which case that could go on for the rest of your existence, which could be a real painful process. Or you can look at that and say, I accept this loss, whatever it might be, um, and I'm going to focus now on what I can do instead of what I can't do. I'm going to use this experience to learn. What did I learn from this? Often a loss, either in our functionality or in a loved one, activates deeper connections and resources that we were unaware of. And with the loss of a loved one, I mean, it's happened so many times with me. In the beginning, it was devastating. When my younger brother passed away, I could not do anything for a month. Couldn't teach, couldn't do anything. And then I started looking at it and saying, because I did the same thing with you that you described, I could have done more. Why didn't he use the tools that I have? And I was sort of blaming myself, which completely incapacitated me. And then I realized, no, that was his choice. He made a very clear choice. And I have to accept and honor that because that was his way of learning whatever it was that he needed to learn. Once I could accept that for his choice, then I can let go of my attachment and my story that I could have or should have done more. Once I let that go, I'm now free to embrace my love for him and for each other and all that we shared, all that we exchanged. And now I start to expand. And what I noticed was that my capacity for love and connection with others deepened and expanded more than I imagined it was possible. And with each person that I lost, there was a period of about 2 years where we lost 16 people, loved ones, family, and friends. And it was nonstop. And it was all different reasons for it. But it was like this nonstop process of loss, loss, loss. And about halfway through it, I discovered that it was an opportunity to love more, open more, receive more. That instead of contracting my heart, I would expand it. And it made a huge difference in how I experienced the losses that came after that point because I was able to celebrate them instead of grieve and mourn continuously, which could again go on endlessly.
Mhm.
It doesn't really help you. It just sort of like puts you in this very dark place. Once I realized that every time I lost a person or I lost something meaningful and valuable to me, either like just growing older and having been a dancer and a martial artist and having enjoyed the freedom of just limitless expression physically, that after a certain time that begins to diminish, you know? So there's the wear and tear on the body. And that creates an identity crisis. And I used to watch it in a lot of the clients when I was younger, and then I started to experience it myself. I go, well, I can't do what I used to do the way I used to do it. My physical presence, my body is not able to do it that way anymore. And then there's that negotiation. I refuse to accept that. I'm just going to train harder, in which case I hurt more. And I was in pain all the time. And I was like, this approach does not work. And why? Why am I doing it? It's not like I'm still performing, you know? So it's that acceptance again. Oh, this is an opportunity to learn through limitation. And loss often creates a limitation in some fashion, either in our personal physical health or our emotional body, so to speak. But it changes the way we see ourselves. And we have to update our identity, the character of self, and say to ourselves, I'm not the same person after this experience or as the result of this illness or injury or personal loss. I am not the same. I accept that. the sooner, the quicker that we accept that we have been changed at a core level, the sooner we can begin the process of exploring our new identity. The identity without that loved one, the identity without that, ability that we used to possess, or whatever it might be, whatever that resource was. And so this is going to happen throughout our entire lives. If we choose to accept that all of this, quote, loss is an opportunity to update our identity and begin exploring the new. Imagine, if you would, that no one ever died and everything stayed the same. How boring.
Mhm.
After a time, it becomes just flattening, like there's no challenge, there's no variety. From a spiritual perspective, we come into this physical reality to experience limitation. When we're not in the physical body, even when we're in the dream state, we have no limitation. We can create instantly with pure thought and imagination. I don't know if you've ever had a lucid dream where you knew you were dreaming and then you decided to create within the dream, which is a thing. It's instantaneous. And I remember when my son was very little and he was having nightmares. And I said, tonight, tell yourself that you're going to remember that you're dreaming and that you're going to create a purple horse in your dream. And it took a few weeks. But one morning he got up and he was jumping up and down, so excited. He said, I did it. I remembered I was dreaming and I created a purple horse in my dream. And I said, how long did it take? He said, it was instant. Because when we are outside of the three-dimensional reality, it is, we are not limited in our ability to create an experience. But we also have access to all that is known in the universe, so to speak. We understand everything when we're no longer in the body. Spiritual growth comes through change, through unpredictability, through surprise, and through challenge. And from a spiritual perspective, it's why we choose to incarnate into the physical realm. Several things happen when we do that. First thing is we forget. We enter what we call the veil of forgetfulness. And time is part of that dimension. There is no time outside of the three-dimensional reality. So we enter this reality and we forget that we are an eternal presence, an eternal soul, that once we leave this realm has access to all that is, and we invest in the character that we create for ourselves to learn through challenges, through limitations, through surprise. And this accelerates our learning process, spiritually speaking. When you start to understand that and you accept that, you begin to accept that every experience is an opportunity for learning and for growth. What makes the difference is whether or not you choose to accept it. And this is a choice because we all have free will here. We can choose to accept or resist and deny. And I've worked with people who still, years and years later, refuse to accept that their loved one has died. They just, I will not accept it. I'm like, that's a tough choice. Look at your life now. Look at how you're living and how you have altered your lifestyle based on that choice to deny and resist the truth of the reality that your loved one has left the physical realm. And it just creates a lot of torment and anxiety and tension for those people. They will learn from it one way or the other. But working with many people in that situation, if I can help them see that they have a choice, because sometimes you can convince yourself that you don't have a choice. Even in something so binary and simple as accept or resist, you can convince yourself that there is no choice. There's only one thing, one choice, and that is to resist. In which case, all of life becomes harder. It becomes a burden. Everything you do is harder. I've been brought into businesses to sort of assess the employees. And you can spot those employees who are holding on to something they refuse to accept because they just have this energy around them, which is dark and it's not pleasant. And they are not nice people often because that resistance creates stagnation in their life flow, in their enjoyment of just moment to moment living. And so in that situation, I try to go right to that person right away and say, tell me your story. What's going on? And eventually they'll reveal that there's an experience that they refuse to accept and that they are opposing and resisting. And sometimes it's a loss of a loved one. And I will gently try to frame that for them as an opportunity. Most of the time, it helps where they can look at it and say, you know, I've never thought of it that way. And just that creates a shift, even just changing the way they're thinking about it or looking at it. Like, oh, it's an opportunity for what? Well, let's go in deeper and find out what there is to discover. It's rare that a person will refuse indefinitely because once they're aware that they do have a choice to accept or resist, it starts working on their subconscious. And then at some point, it may take some time, they will come back around and say, okay, I'm ready to look at this now. What did you mean by an opportunity? Because I'm tired. Resistance is exhausting. Trying to deny reality is exhausting because reality keeps flowing through the present and it's a constant state of change. Everything is changing all the time. So are we. And if we accept that, and we can also say, I'm not the same person today as I was yesterday or 10 years ago, and I accept that I am different and that I am new, I now have an opportunity to begin the process of self discovery through self acceptance. And I can use any experience in my life that I might still be in resistance to. It doesn't have to be a major loss. It can just be a big disappointment at some point, based on a choice that we made. And we're still don't want to accept that that happened. The power of acceptance, it's I can't even describe how vast that choice is. And it's a choice that everybody has the ability to make. But we're not given that as a model. What we are conditioned to do is focus on what we want and what we don't want. And when we don't get what we want, we often refuse to accept that. We regret it. We get disappointment. We get angry. We get sad and depressed because I didn't get what I wanted. And that could be that my loved one died and I didn't want them to. So now I'm locked in because I refuse to accept that reality didn't go the way I wanted it to. And it's not fully conscious. This is very deep. And often we don't acknowledge that it just comes down to I refuse to accept that I didn't get my way. And I'm going to hold on to that. And I might hold on to that for decades, for years and years and years. And that it's like a weed that grows and it becomes more and more intense. And it pulls energy away from your enjoyment of life in order to create a narrative that continues to grow and expand. I am grieving and mourning and angry and depressed about what I didn't get, about what didn't go my way. And we can have several, if not many, of those past experiences. And so the healing process, most of the time we talk about healing as a physical thing, but it's never just physical, it's never just emotional, it's never just psychological. We can't separate those dimensions of self. We have to look at the full spectrum here. The healing process requires that we go and look at the emotional and the psychological as well as the physical. I've been injured many times through performing and through training, and I've had some injuries that took a long time for me to heal. And at a certain point, I began to question, why am I not getting back to 100%? I got to like 80% and it's not improving. And the reason was I was still holding on to some of the fear and trauma of the shock of the injury. And that can be physical or it can be emotional, like the shock of a loss of a loved one. And so I realized I had unfinished business to attend to. I must now go back and look at my experience, what I was thinking, what I was feeling at the time, at that moment. What choices did I make in the moment? And this is an interesting thing. So I'm going to use myself as the example. I was walking down the street and I sprained my ankle very badly. And I had done that before and had healed quickly, but this one was not healing so quickly. And when I went back and I asked myself what was in on my mind just before it happened, what was I focusing on? What was I thinking about? And I was able to identify that. And it was fear. This was right after the birth of my first child, my son. And I was uncertain about how to be a father. And in that moment, I fragmented, was not paying attention, turned my ankle over on the curb, fell into the street, got on my feet, put weight on it, and in that moment, I knew this was bad. In that moment, in a split second, I went through in my mind all of my responsibilities to my wife, who's recovering from giving birth, my newborn son, my clients, my classes, all the things I would not be able to do because I am injured. And that created a shock that was 10 times worse than the actual injury. So now I go through the process of focusing on the body, and then the body stops improving at around 80%. I go back and I look at it and I said, I'm still holding on to the shock of the realization of what that experience meant or how I interpreted it. And all the fear and all of the disappointment that were instantly generated from that realization. I've been holding on to that and I need to let that go. I need to accept that. And I need to go back in time and tell myself, you're going to be fine. Everybody's going to be okay. Let this go. Do not hold on to that. And when I was able to let that go, my body healed the rest of the way from 80% to 100%. That was a huge revelation to me because I realized in those moments we create scenarios, what if scenarios, what's going to happen if I can't go to work because I'm injured or I'm sick? What's going to happen if I, you know, don't make money? And then we start creating worst case scenarios without realizing that we do it because we can do that in a split second. We often will say to ourselves, how will I live now that my loved one has gone? I won't be able to, I can't imagine going on without that person. And then another thought comes in, and then another realization comes in, and we don't realize that we made, in essence, a vow. We made a statement that we created as a vow. I cannot continue. I will not be able to do this ever again. Whether it's true or not, we can program that into our bodies, into our emotional body, into our psychological body, without realizing that it's there. It's like a stealth virus program in your computer. You don't know it's there, but it's affecting the way your system operates. And eventually, it can break down the operation altogether. So, this part of the healing process is going back and looking at in the moment what statements, choices, vows did I make that I did not unmake because I never acknowledged it. And I've always, every time that I've done this, I have discovered that in those moments, I often decided that I would not accept this. But then I continued on. But once you say, I cannot accept it, that stays in your system and it creates an obstacle, a limitation that we often are unaware of until we go back and look at it. I mean, ideally, this is what psychotherapy should help us do. You know, go to a therapist because we're experiencing an obstacle, a limitation, and we don't know why. And so a good therapist will help us discover those choices that we made in the moment, those narratives that we created and didn't realize are still operating underneath the surface of our conscious awareness. This is a cleansing process. Going back and saying, what am I still holding on to that no longer serves me now? And it's anything that you hold on in your emotional body and in your mental body affects you physically. There's no way that it cannot. It will, because that's the way we're designed. So if you're experiencing patterns of limitation, you have to go and look at all those dimensions. How am I taking care of myself physically? Well, I'm doing everything that I can. I'm eating well, I'm getting enough rest, I'm exercising, but yet I still feel crappy. Okay, what's going on in the emotional body? What am I holding on to? What toxic energies am I harboring that I'm not aware of? Regrets, disappointments, fear, anger, sadness. Can I acknowledge those and release them? And when you do, you notice that you feel different, often better. Same thing in the mental field. What narratives did I create with my imagination that are still operating, such as not good enough or can't? When we say, I can't do this, we won't. And it's so subtle. Like once you tell yourself you can't do something and you forget that you said it, it's still operating. And then when it comes time to do something, you realize that you can't, but you don't know why. Well, examine it. What am I feeling? What am I experiencing? What do I believe about this? Oh, I believe that I can't do this. Is that true? Where did that belief come from? All right, let's time travel. Go back to, if we can find it, sometimes we can't, but if we can find the moment in time where we made that choice, where we said to self, I cannot do this, and then challenge that statement, say, you know what? I can do this. I give myself permission to let that statement go. And now I'm going to embody I can instead of I can't. It's so simple. That's reprogramming in the mental field. Sometimes it comes from others, where somebody else tells us, you're not good enough to do that. Don't even think about that. You can't have that. And if we accept that as law, we program it into our energy bodies, and it becomes part of our identity and our program. Until we reach a point where we say, I would really like to do that, but for some reason I feel like I'm not allowed. Where did that come from? Oh, mom told me that when I was little because mom was trying to protect me. And I see that for what it was and where it came from. And I'm going to give that back to mom. So when it comes from somebody else, we can return the gift and we can say, yes, that served me for a while, but it's no longer serving me now. Thank you very much for that gift, but I'm giving it back. And we can create a little ceremony to do that. And it's a wonderful way to clear out any of those old energies, beliefs, and programs that we might be holding on to. Ideally, we want to see ourselves, our identity as fluid. We can be anyone or anything that we choose. And that is true. When you were in New York and you realized you could be who you wanted to be here and weren't beholden to your family, or your culture, and this happens with a lot of people who come to this city, they don't want to leave for a long time. And when they do go back, they realize that they are not accepted in the same fashion in that environment as they were in this environment. Acceptance. There's acceptance within, and then there's being accepted externally. When others do not accept us for who we choose to be, there's conflict. And this is an opportunity to look at our social network and update it. And this is not an easy thing to do because this often entails family who refuse to accept a choice that we made or refuse to accept us for our preference of who we choose to be. Ultimately, you have a choice. You can accept their resistance and say to them, I understand that's the way you feel. I'm sorry, but I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to be this person because this is what I need, whether you accept it or not. And it may even result in a fracture of the relationship in which they're no longer a part of your daily existence. And this is sometimes friendships end this way, and even family relationships end sometimes because one person refuses to accept another person, either the choice they are making to be themselves or choices they're making for their lifestyle. The other alternative is to say, okay, I won't do it. I won't be who I want to be in order to make you feel comfortable, which I've done in my life. And it's awful because it makes you feel like a victim. It makes you feel kind of like you're being held prisoner or held hostage. And what often we don't realize is that that is a choice that we make, but we will often blame it on the other person and say, I'm not allowing myself to be fully present and own who I am because mom won't let me. But that's not really true. Mom can't stop you or whoever it might be. If you make the choice to accept yourself fully, claim full ownership and authority of who you are, who you wish to be, what you wish to experience in your life and your lifestyle, nobody can stop you. But it may result in certain people distancing themselves from you in your social circle or abandoning you for a period of time. It happened with me with my entire family, like my parents and my brothers, when I decided to stop playing the role of caretaker for everybody. I had a conversation with each person. I said, don't complain to me about this one or that one. Go talk to them. Well, everybody got upset and pissed off at me because I stopped playing the role the way they wanted me to. It took about 6 months. But in that 6 months, I kept communicating to everybody, I'm not abandoning you. I am not rejecting you. I'm trying to renegotiate here. I want a new relationship with everybody. I want an adult relationship. And during that 6 months, they were forced to communicate with each other instead of through me. And then eventually, I was able to establish new relationships with each person in my family on my terms, which is this is who I am. This is what I allow and what I don't allow in terms of the relationship. Having those clear boundaries. You can't abuse me. You can't use me in that way. I'm not available for that because I need those boundaries in place to protect me so that I am free to experience all of who I am. If I don't have those boundaries, I'm constantly trying to take care of this one or fulfill that one's agenda, and I'm not free inside of myself. And oddly enough, that is a healing process. It's healing the fragmented part of the identity that is attached to other people and their expectations of what they need us to be in order to play their role. There was a time in my life, and we're almost out of time here, but there was a time in my life where I just said, you know what? I'm not going to be the caretaker for everybody. I'm setting clear boundaries and limitations. And if people don't accept it, that's their challenge to deal with. And I made it clear over a period of time to everybody in my life, and my social circle shrank by about a third. And I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, like a third of the people in my life are no longer a part of my life. But then when I looked more closely at those people, what I realized was I didn't have healthy relationships with those people to begin with. Those relationships were based upon them taking more than what I was receiving from them. So that's okay. Once I was able to accept that gracefully, my social circle started to expand again. And over a period of time, I made new relationships based on new healthy boundaries with people who would accept that and accept me for who I need to be. And I'm still friends with those people. So there is, we go through phases of cleansing, clearing out the old stuff, releasing those old attachments, sometimes people, so that we can continue to grow and expand and continue to learn. Any comments?
Ooh, you said so many beautiful things today, and I hear what you're saying, and I can feel everything that you're saying. So, um, yeah, and I'm also thankful that you shared your story with your dad, um, because I had the same experience, by the way.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, my dad died 2020, as well. But
Hmm. Hmm.
I was also meditating. I was also getting connected to him. And the morning he died, I didn't have any access anymore.
Hmm.
There were thick walls, and I could see my dad shrinking as a baby.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that was it was really interesting to me what you were
What I
talking about.
noticed is the access changes, the quality of the connection changes after that.
Yeah.
And it can take some time. And what I've come to understand is that person is processing at another level. And sometimes that takes time from our perspective before they've processed what they need to process. And then they can come back to a state of connection again. Not always, but often.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's right. It's such a beautiful journey actually to experience this.
Yeah.
Of course, the pain and loss it's really deep. It's really deep. But when I talk to friends of mine who didn't have this experience
Yeah.
yet, I always say like it was the worst thing I went through, but it was also the most beautiful gift I got maybe from
Yes.
it.
Yes.
It is such an interesting, beautiful, transformational journey as
Yeah.
you want to experience it like this, of course.
Hmm.
Um, I'm so thankful for it. Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference in how you live.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you too. Um, yeah. It's really. I'm so thankful you came back. Actually. Yeah. And I want to close the circle because from what I told you in the beginning that I was thinking, oh my God, why didn't he ask me before? Um, why didn't he take this help before?
Hmm.
Um, I was meditating, so I was there with my pain, still really
Yes. Right.
pain. And then I
Hmm.
thought, okay, I accept it was his way, his choice. But
Hmm.
what do I do with the pain? How do I manage this pain? When is it going to go? And then as a voice came to me, or I had the insight suddenly, it was it's it's just the expression of your own love for your dad.
Hmm.
And when I experienced this, it was really magical.
Yeah.
Everything went away. The pain went away. Um, I it was really peaceful what I experienced there, and also all the expectations from my dad went also away.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it was really um, yeah, that was also very healing and transformational experience I made last week. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and I have the feeling
Wonderful.
that you kicked a lot of things with just coming back and getting into touch with you and your work. And yeah,
Well, I'm
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 happy.
glad that it was helpful.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Mm.
Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.